Oh, good evening. You've caught me in my off hours. See, I'm pretty interested in Deltarune's story, but I play more than one game a year, so I just can't keep up. So I've decided to watch a theory video, that way it can help me fill in the gaps.
Through the evidence we see in Entry 17 in relation to Sans the Comic and Alfie's experiments, I can say, with complete confidence, that W.D. Gaster is Danish.
Oh, come on! Everybody knows he's Welsh. Previously, I've spoken outwardly on my disdain for the lore-led video game and what has come from it. Taking an already basic mystery and stretching it across years only to never resolve it leaves a bad taste in my mouth. Well, either that or it's the taste of roach poison. Ugh, sorry. I thought it was a Pepsi. I made the bold claim that the developers of these games thought the player was too stupid to catch on to their scheme, but I failed to consider something worse. I was the idiot the whole time. If I strawman myself, no one can get mad at me! Well, yes, on occasion a game will create a ridiculous amount of lore for the player to dig through in place of a story. Equally as often will a story have hidden tidbits underneath the main plot for fans to speculate on intentionally. This has proven to be successful, but also a hard line to toe. Succeed, and not only do you have a game with an active fan base, but also a story with insane narrative depth. Fail, and you look like you failed middle school literature. Adverbs are a bitch. Some of my favorite games ever have an unreal amount of puzzle pieces to be connected. It's a good way to give you something to chew on past the roll of the credits while not distracting from the main story of the game. At least, it shouldn't distract. There's this strange phenomenon I've noticed where certain stories are often ignored in their own context, and instead are treated as communal puzzles to be solved, and not without reason. Previously, I talked about Five Nights at Freddy's being the sort of ground zero for lore bait, but I feel like in that series' specific case, its weird, vague hintings to the plot led to a more interesting story experience than if it was told outright. I think if it didn't have this aspect, we wouldn't really care about most of the story's characters nearly as much in the early days. The community piecing together the story and characters led to us getting invested in them before we even really knew anything about them. Without that, I don't think characters like William Afton would have had that initial fan base, or even that he would have come anywhere near the household name that he is now. Pretty fucked up household. The problem is that many games following FNAF tried to copy the appeal of its storytelling, but only the storytelling, leading to the actual direct text and game being secondary to the riddles and lore. And since the general sphere of fans had been trained by FNAF to interact with the story in a way that treated the meat of the game as an afterthought, they took a video game and turned it into a social game, a communal project to be terraformed instead of a single art piece to be analyzed and explored. The problem here isn't that these games were being interacted with in this way either, because they were designed for the puzzle. Hello Neighbor is not supposed to be played, it's supposed to be dissected. New theory! Mr. Peterson is a frog! The problem is that this kind of analysis only works when it's intentionally put in place for its audience. Outside of this very specific niche, this method of analysis makes engaging with a story made for humans impossible. Luckily, the FNAF crowd typically only plays games following in its footsteps and live in the gutters of Toy House and are sustained on Twitter discourse. So luckily, this problem isn't one for the game industry at large. Unfortunately, I was a band kid and a theater kid, meaning everything I like gets the fandom treatment. This video's like going to a pride parade and getting mad that there's gay people there. The first time I took notice of this was with the release of Doki Doki Literature Club, a very popular game that I genuinely think people have yet to analyze in its own context. Yeah, that's why I have this game downloaded. Literary analysis. With the game being a light parody of dating simulators and anime tropes, it attracted a pretty wide net of people who played the game with their eyes shut and their pants zippers open. Probably made this moment pretty awkward. This game is a bait and switch, but the problem is that most people only cared about the switch, and assume everything else in the game is straight fluff there to chug along to the next scare. This, in combination with the game's meta storytelling in the late game, kind of led to people to ignore the main text outside of the spooky portions, especially after people found a light ARG in the game's files. Then the audience didn't even care about the game itself. Now the game was only a vehicle for a completely different story. Now, I'm not mad that people are interested in these aspects. Obviously, it's intentionally put there for the superfans to analyze. It isn't there by accident. It's an intentional part of the game. Hell, with the release of its enhanced console port, Doki Doki Literature Club Plus, it added a ton of external lore for the players to dig through, and all of this plays back into the main game. The problem is that most people aren't actually actually invested in the game's narrative. They're more interested in the mystery behind the game and just getting to the next step of it, which does a disservice to the game. After digging through all the lore and piecing it together, most people don't care to engage with a more complete story, rather feeling satisfaction that they completed the puzzle and then moving on to the next puzzle. It's a shame too, because in Doki's case, the hidden lore gives a ton of context to why the world is the way it is. It turns a fairly basic bait and switch into a fairly compelling story that I haven't really seen done nearly as well in other games. All that passion just for a game I have to play with my door locked. Whenever a new Star Wars game comes out, discussing it in any meaningful way is near impossible, which I know. Asking for a true dissection of a Star Wars story is like asking for a meaningful dialogue about Cheez-Its. It's just not gonna happen. What irks me is that dozens of hundreds of hours go into writing these stories in these games, and I find quite a few of them to be interesting and narratively fulfilling. But going online, you find millions of dork-ass losers complaining about how they misspelled Kyber Crystal in a single subtitle, or how they misnamed the 10,000th background droid or something. It's not that I don't think fun trivia like that isn't interesting. I'm a Sonic fan, it's all I know. But when it gets in the way of proper discussion, no, just standard comments on the game's story, it becomes more than a handful. I think a lot of the extended universe Star Wars stuff that a lot of people would only qualify as lore are some of the best things in the franchise, but you can't discuss that anywhere because the vast majority of people just know about it for the sake of knowing about it. Kirby's a series with a shit ton of superfluous lore, and almost all discussion of the story online is surrounding the theories and connections all the games have to each other. I'm not here to poo-poo on anyone into that. It's not like there's much narrative depth in most of the games to talk about anyways, but sometimes only hearing about the lore-led aspects of the series can get tiring. It's just every Nintendo fan who doesn't play anything outside of the bog standard Nintendo game's favorite fun fact. Hey, did you know that Kirby has lore? Yeah, that's pretty interesting. How's the job search going? I know this is just a me thing since every Kirby fan is knee-deep in the lore, but I don't know. Doesn't it get a bit boring bringing up the same facts over and over and over again? I get it. Kirby fights gods at the end of his games. You got anything else for me? Deltarune Chapter 5 was the real breaking point for me. I've gone on record saying Deltarune is my second favorite game of all time. My straight-up favorite on a good day. I'm a super fan. I know what a Penumbra, Woody, Theory, Wingding, Snowgrave, Goner device inside me is. I said the same thing to my dad, and that's why I spend the weekends begging for nickels at the intersection. I am very clearly biased towards the game, so take everything I say with a grain of salt. Everyone who talks about this game is a complete fucking moron. Hey, if you're offended by that, I'm talking about it too, aren't I? I have issues with the game, probably more than most, but the actual story itself is not something I have an issue with. I think the way that Deltarune dispenses its mysteries is very interesting, and while there are a million niche background details that seemingly have no connection to each other, the actual narrative of the game can be fully understood by just playing it. This isn't FNAF where you get a code in a spin-off game and punch it into a wall in a completely different game, and then get an abstraction of events that might have happened. No, in Deltarune you just have to pay really close attention to get additional mystery on top of the game's main plot. But with all these little puzzle pieces out in the open, people of course were theorizing. But with such a massive community, the theories started making less and less sense. Come Chapter 5, I saw people enraged that all their theories weren't all proven correct, which just shone a light on where the issues are in the culture of theory nowadays. I saw people calling Toby Fox a hack fraud because a character without an official name wasn't a major plot point in the chapter, or Asgore not being the final boss. Hey, if you're upset that you didn't get an Asgore boss fight in Deltarune, I might have the game for you. I don't think that these were insane predictions, but being upset that the story didn't go the way you imagined in your brain is just something you have to get used to in any story. The important part of the phrase, "it's just a theory," is the word just. These are only predictions, not airtight premonitions of the story to come. Hell, the game didn't even conclude with the 5th chapter. Acting like there's no time for your predictions to come true 3/4 of the way through the game is kind of like turning off a movie an hour in and getting mad at it for not concluding. Undertale is similarly a game that had a lot of loose threads at the end of the day, but I don't think it's anywhere near as hated since the mysteries were either more about the character dynamics and the world's history before you showed up, or were so vague and filled with potential that it was obvious they would be followed up on later. That, in combination with the game's narrative style being fairly foreign to the player base, led to the theories being secondary to just exploring the characters. Deltarune has a lot more active mysteries taking place at the same time, and the game is more than 4 times the length of of its predecessor, so it's only natural that there would be lengthier and more complex discussions about all the ways it could relate to the main game. And hey, that's part of the fun of each new chapter of the game releasing. The problem is that people got so wrapped up in their headcanons or community expectations that they became more invested in that than the actual story. Deltarune specifically is a game very much created with the intention of someone going around picking at every little thing to theorize over, but that shouldn't take priority over the game's pre-established logic or undermine the story for a moment that would be cool in a vacuum. It's okay to go into a project with high expectations. If a story sets something up, it should follow up on it, but people think that literally everything is a setup, or that multiple pieces of evidence can't lead to a joint conclusion. Half of the mysteries in Deltarune are the same mystery, and the ones that aren't are more about the relationship to the player and expectation that they have about the game's narrative. I can't even keep up at this point because the fact that this game has, and I put heavy quotes on this, lore, means that just reading the story and making fairly accurate predictions is now theory. Everything is theory, but not even theory for the actual purpose of theorizing. Sometimes just stating the story of something verbatim or just connecting dots with no regard for the actual story. Not everything is a theory or supposed to be taken literally. Some things are just jokes or flavor text, and sometimes a single moment that you read into isn't supposed to be a pillar of the entire game's narrative. That's kind of the fun of a story like this, seeing what's going to come back and what isn't. And just because you read into a moment and it meant a lot to you, but it ended up not being an important part of the story, that doesn't mean the game forgot or has a sloppy narrative. It just means that that moment was important to you, and that's fine. In fact, even if something isn't a deliberate choice in the world, it can still mean something to you, the player. It's the difference between a theory and just a reading of the text. And personal reading of a story is important, and it's kind of what art as a whole is built on, whereas theory is about predicting the actual tangible text that everyone will experience. I'm only so upset about it with Deltarune since it is the game I'm most tuned into, but this is a problem with pretty much everything I try to interface with. I do enjoy talking about all art I enjoy, and picking apart its pieces is just a part of that discussion, but it becomes a problem when almost every conversation is a riddle to be solved, or you have to be tuned into fandom nonsense to even communicate, or hell, when the entire fanbase is so checked out, they think that the standard narrative in of itself is a theory. I remember seeing the idea of a theory for Portal 2, commonly referred to as the moron theory. This stated that the game's secondary antagonist Wheatley was deliberately created to pump bad thoughts into the AI GLaDOS's brain as a way to stop her from straight up killing everyone around her. This isn't bad deduction. In fact, I can see exactly how people got to this theory. Because the game straight up fucking tells you it to your face! Sorry, if you missed out on that one, you must have been playing the game with your toes in your ears and your dick on the controller. If this is subtext, I don't want to know what your text looks like. I find it especially annoying because picking apart stories to analyze secondary themes or straight up sharing your personal thoughts on something is something I love seeing people do. Everyone does have a different perspective or make different connections, but as a whole, at least in the circles I reside in, theorizing is more about beating the artist at their own game than actual analysis or good-natured prediction. The problem isn't with these pieces of art, even if said pieces of art do have problems. The issue is with internet fandom. Being a fan of something, especially a passionate and enthusiastic one, there's nothing illegal about that. If there was, I wouldn't be allowed in Walmart. It's just fandom as a monolith that's the problem. A collection of people more obsessed with the idea of liking something than actually liking it. This isn't to invalidate the pieces of good that come from a community. Fandom, the concept, and the people within it aren't the problem. The problem is that in the modern age of the internet, fandom no longer is about creating, but creative inbreeding. Something almost as bad as real inbreeding. You can only like Homestuck if you live in Georgia. Theorism has been overrun by content creators. For every video made by a dedicated fan just sharing their predictions, there's 12 more from content farmers spamming keywords until they fumble their way to a conclusion, since they're going to make 3 more theories this month. Fan art is now made because it's profitable instead of love for the source. All discussion is more about being right than it is about passion. Obviously, this isn't everyone, but this monetary incentive has changed how fandom carries itself. Obviously, social capital and fact freaks have always existed in nerd circles, but with the modern internet prioritizing discourse and money, these people are propped up algorithmically, giving them more attention in the community as well by taking up the space that the more reasonable fan would occupy. These turn people who are essentially grifters into community pillars that you are expected to listen to out of fear of being called a poser. This sets that community's expectation for art, and when the game doesn't follow up on the conversation that the fandom monolith has created and takes up more space than the actual art, fans fans become upset, not at the other fans, but the art for not fitting into fan expectation. It's why theory and lore culture have become so impossible to contribute to meaningfully, because the lore of these games is just fodder for creators instead of being seen as full pieces of the actual art. The people who talk the loudest or talk the most about something are going to get the most impact, rather than someone who takes time and formulates their thoughts fully. Can you believe I got this mad over somebody saying that William Afton from Five Nights at Freddy's is Gaster from Undertale? Can you also understand why I'm so mad? For as many times as I see the phrase, video games are art, I don't think a lot of people genuinely mean it. It's like the phrase, animation is cinema, a slogan with true meaning that's only ever spoken to deflect actual engagement with the art rather than a true belief. Sure, aspects of the game are indisputably art, but together, many people see them as just games, or just interactive animations, or a movie you can make choices in. The game is seen as secondary, or just as a novelty or time waster, not as a fully complete art piece where all the elements of it come together to make a cohesive work. You need to look at art as its whole, not as its ingredients. Understand why something is in the art in the context of everything around it. This isn't a gamer problem either. This is just a general nerd issue. Before I even took my first breath, people were mailing complaints to comic writers or harassing each other on forums because some random guy disregarded 60-year-old lore in a Christmas crossover comic. Nerds care more about knowing things about stories than the actual stories themselves, and this isn't gonna be cured anytime soon. It's a first disease that a quarantine from the outside world would make worse. Now, let's be clear. This is only really a problem with the narrative projects that appeal to theater kids and the coworker who eats in their car. This isn't a problem with the vast majority of media, but I think it's just a microcosm of how fandom is often a rot on the art it's based out of. Fan works and discussion, that's more than fine. In fact, it's only natural. Expressing love or just talking about something you enjoy is never an issue. Fan communities and fandom are two different things in my mind, with fandom being more of a force than an actual community. It's the general internet force that pushes discussion towards engagement rather than discussion. It becomes more about social capital and being the first to say something than actually being about the love of the source. It's why entire fandoms can disappear overnight, despite love for the source not dying, because when there's 1,000 people a second saying any possible thing and all they care about is getting in, profiting, and jumping out as fast as possible, it means the second everything's been said, they just jump to the next thing and do it all over again. It's why fandom grifting is so easy, because all that needs to be known is the catchphrases and wiki notes that the community repeat. I'm not against having some fun. Picking and choosing what you like in a piece of art and sharing it, that is fun! And it's more than a fair way to interact with the art and can invite either discussion or straight up just be a good time. Am I going to throw a hissy fit if you think that Sans the Skeleton and Zelda would make a great couple? No, but I would have a couple questions. My problem is the atmosphere that this creates for the art, making the actual piece of art secondary to the discussion of it. Sure, you might get the broad strokes of Deltarune watching a lore recap or watching someone else play it, but art is about more than the broad strokes, especially with video games. The physical act of playing the game is a part of the experience, and what makes gaming a unique art form. It's a complete work that you're not fully interfacing with unless you are physically playing it. And while I still think you could be a fan without playing for reasons aside from the gameplay, if you're going to interface with the story in the extended community puzzle, you do need to play the entirety of the game so you can understand the pieces in their full context. It genuinely makes you more knowledgeable on the subject you want to discuss, and will make it more fun to see where things go in the future. I'd also like to say again, I don't think a game being packed to the gills with lore is necessarily a bad thing. Having breadcrumbs to lead you deeper into a story is fun, or just having a ton of flavor text to expand on the game where the main plot couldn't is not the problem. Some games overdo it to an insane degree, but when that portioning is just right, it can really hit the spot. It's just that audiences are so trained off of games that sloppily incorporate this style of storytelling that they often engage with the art in a way that is not intended with by that piece of art. It leads to games having to spell out obvious concepts over and over just to make sure that people don't end up making a theoretical mountain out of a literal molehill. It's why every game beats you over the head with the most basic of concepts. concepts. Not to get on my high horse. Nah, who am I kidding? This is fun. But I think there's this problem in gaming where everyone is coming to the medium for different reasons. Video games stand at this very niche intersection between entertainment, play, storytelling, visual art, and skill. So many different kinds of players are involved with games, but it's annoying when the entire conversation is taken up by exactly one type of fan. I do want to talk about the complex narratives and theorize, but I want that to exist as its own discussion, not piggybacking off of a YouTube video you saw and are parroting the opinions of. You've got to take in these pieces of art as full complete products instead of just disconnected puzzle pieces. Nothing's wrong with theorizing or throwing ideas at the wall. Once again, it is fun. Just actually care about the games that you're talking about, or at least like stop engagement farming your fanfiction or treating your headcanons as fact. Please, I'm begging you!
But wait, did you catch that? The anger expressed here implies a previous history in fandom spaces. This evidence fully proves that Big Deuce is a virgin.